So the question comes up, do illegals pay taxes? I didn't know people loved paying taxes so much. I recently did a video about US citizens having to leave the state of Florida because of SB 1718, and the overwhelming comment was, they're not paying taxes. Well, first of all, I didn't know you guys were so fond of paying taxes, but since you care about paying taxes, let's elaborate on the topic a little more and understand exactly the answer to this question. According to the IRS, in 2015, 4.4 million people. There he goes again, talking about numbers and stuff. Don't do it, Jose. I don't want to hear it. Every time I believe something stupid, you come around with numbers and facts and stuff like that and make me look like I'm dumb. Who do not have a social security number volunteered to pay taxes. Now, people will tell you it's because they feel prideful in paying taxes and they feel American by paying taxes. But the truth is, the reason they're paying taxes is because they have hopes that one day they can have a legal entry into the United States. And if they show that they're paying taxes, they can prove, one, that they've been working in the United States, and two, that they have law-abiding intention. So if one day they're able to have a law or a program, they can use a lawyer to show, hey, this person has been working in the United States and they've also volunteered to pay taxes. This is a person who's law-abiding and is well-intentioned. So it's not exactly about tax-paying volunteerism. It's more about people who understand that if they pay their taxes, it can look very favorable for them if they ever have a hearing at a court date in the future. Then you have other individuals who just like to do things the right way and they want within the best of their capacities to conform to the law. I have a friend who's been illegal in the United States for about 4 decades, and he pays taxes every single year because he feels that he's American and that's what he has to do. Again, after living in this country for 40 years, you want to do things the right way. Whether you have a legal status or not, a lot of people feel that this is the American thing to do and that they have to give their contribution to society. Another friend of mine tells me that he would feel wrong if he didn't pay taxes because he knows it's the right thing to do. So while some people feel that it will benefit them to pay taxes, other people feel that it's wrong not to do it. So they understand that despite the fact they're not going to be able to benefit from Social Security, they still tap into the system and pay their share simply because they feel it's the right thing to do. In the year 2010, $13 billion were paid into Social Security by people who will never be allowed to tap into that system. I wonder how many Americans would volunteer to give Social Security to Canadian citizens if they would never benefit from it. And for a lot of people, it's also a thing of pride that you're not going to label me as somebody who doesn't pay taxes. You're not going to label me as a criminal. I'm a hardworking, good-intentioned person. And despite your efforts, you're not going to be able to label me as something else. And while I couldn't find analytics on the nationality, I'm going to guess that overwhelmingly, the vast majority of people paying taxes undocumented are going to be Mexican, but that's just my own personal theory. I can't really prove it. In fact, it's believed that about 50% of people who are undocumented in the United States are in some way or another volunteering to pay taxes, averaging somewhere around $12 billion in local and state taxes and somewhere in the $23 billion range in federal taxes. That's about enough money to buy every house and building on Marco Island every single year. Average listing price there right now is $1.2 million. Over a 10-year period, that's enough contributions in taxes to permanently house 1 million Americans. That's only half of the people who are undocumented that volunteer to pay taxes. Imagine if all of them could create stable lives in the United States and pay taxes. Literally, it would be enough money in tax revenue to house every single person in the United States who was disabled, thought they were disabled, or decided they just simply wanted a house for free.
if every person who's undocumented in the United States was just allowed to be here and pay taxes over a 20-year period, you could house everybody in the United States who was disabled, elderly, poor, homeless. All of that would be paid for from the labor, just the skimming off the top of the tax revenue. I'm talking paid off housing units. What they would pay in taxes would be enough to house every indigent American that's ever existed on this land. So that's on a state and federal level. Let's just talk about here in Florida, day-to-day undocumented person. Do they pay taxes or not? It may actually surprise you that the dollar earned by an undocumented person is actually taxed at a higher rate than a regular legal worker. Let me explain to you how. Here are two checks. The builder on top decided to use illegal labor, and the builder on the bottom used his check to use legal labor. The tax rate for a wealthy contractor is 37%, but for a regular laborer, the tax rate is only 12%. When the contractor does his distribution to labor, he'll have to pay the tax rate on those laborers at his rate. Therefore, the tax rate for illegal labor will end up in the state of Florida costing the contractor 25% more in taxes than if he had distributed the money to somebody who was a legal laborer. Anybody who has ran a business in Florida knows that hiring illegal workers actually costs the contractor more than hiring legal labor. It's not a matter of what's cheaper, it's a matter of what labor force is accessible. But there's people who have never had an administrative job. All they've done,
you know, right? Hoes ain't shit, dog. Let me tell you something about the hoes. Oh man, I'll be starting with the hair too, though. Freaking in the wind.
And they've spent more time with a crack pipe than they have with an Excel program. And if you're using illegal labor, most likely you're not going to distribute checks from your company. You're going to end up paying the workers cash, so you don't have a paper trail that you're using illegal workers. Many times that cash comes from buying things they don't need and reselling them at a loss after paying taxes so they can obtain the cash money. So not only are these contractors paying a higher tax rate for these workers, but they're also having to take about a 10 to 15% loss on the money they're turning into cash so they can be able to pay these workers. So it's not cheaper for them to use illegal labor. It's the only option they have if they're going to push their construction jobs forward. And this is how illegal laborers actually end up paying more taxes on what they earn than somebody who's legal and only at a 12% tax rate. And many times the difference of what an illegal laborer gets paid less is actually just the exact number it costs to defer the difference on what the contractor is paying out of pocket in his own personal taxes. Guys, what that really means is that when illegal person makes $1 less than what a legal worker would make, instead of us, the people, being able to pocket that money, the government is able to pocket that money. Which is why the United States doesn't resolve the illegal immigration problem. It only keeps it in a perpetual mode of never-ending limbo, because in that state, all that money that would have gone to the people, either builders or workers, gets to go back into the hands of the government. Every dollar that an illegal person makes less than a regular worker is a dollar that the government gets to keep. And that's why if you've ever worked for a contractor in Florida, they're very likely to want you to take a check directly from the customer and then give them a cash kickback versus them being the middleman as a contractor should. But that just goes to show how uninformed Americans have become and how they're unaware of how things actually work versus how they're told things work by the people who want to make sure that those things don't change. With construction in Florida being heavily dependent on illegal labor, it's questionable whether the state will now be able to continue. What has made the state so attractive is how fast it's been able to grow. But without this labor force that was being exploited previously by the government and by contractors, moving forward, who is going to build these projects in a timely fashion? Well, most likely, it's going to cost you, the buyer, more. Not just more money, but also a longer waiting list to get the same product. And there it is. That is how and why illegal workers actually pay more in taxes. And let's not forget that after that money being taxed at 37%, then those people go and file taxes and pay taxes again at a 12%, which in reality brings the total to something like 49% tax rate, which means that the person working illegally is actually for their labor indirectly having to pay more than the actual contractors. If you live in a state like Alabama, the vast majority of the money that moves around is cash. However, in the state of Florida, because it's a tax burdened state, people move here so they're not burdened by taxes. The vast majority of people that you're going to work for, in my experience, 97% of my customers will only deal with a check. They refuse to give you cash because it's an incentive for them to have a write-off. Many times when I worked for people in Naples, Florida, I had to argue with the customers because the customer, the paying customer to me, would refuse to take my receipt the way I wrote it. They wanted me to write the receipt for something else, like it was a moving expense or something, when it was really a hauling service for garbage removal, because they were trying to write off every dollar they could, which means that at least in the state of Florida, the vast majority of the money coming down that cash network ends up via check. Of course, if you're living in Alabama, where mostly it's cash money moving, then in that case, a scenario like what we're talking about here in the state of Florida, this type of transaction isn't the most common in a state like Alabama, but in Florida, the way the state of Florida is set up, most transactions are going to be via check. Also, in a state like Alabama, many of the trades involved in construction can bypass the contractor and work directly for the customer. In the state of Florida, you have to have that contractor, which means that it basically creates this scenario where the vast majority of transactions have to happen in the order I explained.